Hey everybody, Dave here with another Pathfinder rule reminder for you, and today we're going to do something a little different. They say the best way to teach and to learn is by showing and not telling, so what I want to do is show you a very brief clip, about a minute long, from a recent Glass Cannon actual play session, one of their live Strange Aeon sessions. If you're not familiar with the Glass Cannon, they're an actual play role-playing group that primarily does Pathfinder and are now transitioning from 1st edition to 2nd edition, so 2nd edition rules are fairly new to them, and they also do a ton of other stuff. Call of Cthulhu, they do Delta Green, they go to their webpage, in their channel, they have a million stuff, and they're all worth checking out. I'll make sure I leave a link in the description as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at that clip, and then we'll come back in 1 minute and discuss what we see there.
And you see the first thing it does, this will be fun, 3-action thing. This is how you know it's gonna be badass. It sees you, and while you were humping it, if there was a mouth to it that like still had skin on it, it almost looks like it's smiling, like it likes it. And it starts dancing rhythmically to your thrusts. And all of you, whatever you're doing, you just can't help but look at this thing.
Don't get the rules wrong.
Everybody
established that Xantar is easily hypnotized.
Each creature that witnesses the dance must attempt a will save.
I didn't witness it.
You see it.
I'm not looking at it.
Oh, did you tell me you weren't looking at it?
Did I tell you where my character looks? He's looking at the Battle of Sir Julie and the Golem.
I'm currently looking at the Bone Golem.
I'm probably looking at it because I did just try to hit it.
Thank you for playing the game.
Whatever.
Unlike these guys.
Whatever.
We're having a good time.
Okay, so what we saw in this clip was an encounter between a bone golem and a necrophidius, which is kind of a like bone skeleton snake thing that is it's not undead, it's actually a construct, but it's between those two enemies and a party of players. Now, the necrophidius has an ability called Dance of Death. Dance of Death takes 3 actions, and the text for Dance of Death says, "The necrophidius sways, its serpentine form undulating and clattering in a hypnotic rhythm. Each creature that witnesses the dance must attempt a DC 18 will save." So, as we saw in the video, the second the GM, Troy, says he's doing this dance, everybody needs to give me a will save, half the table instantly says, well, wait a second.
I didn't witness it.
You see it.
I'm not looking at it.
Oh, did you tell me you weren't looking at it?
Did I tell you where my character looks? He's looking at the Battle of Sir Julie and the Golem.
I'm currently looking at the Bone Golem.
And this is pretty much par for the course. This exact thing happened in my game. It wasn't a necrophidius, but it was another creature with a gaze attack similar to this one. And half the table just instantly said, well, wait a second, we're not paying attention to that thing. We don't need to make the save. So the question is this the way it's intended to work? And I guess first thing I should say, I'm not here to say Troy got it wrong. Every GM can manage the game and the rules however they believe is appropriate. And I will also say that later in the same session, the necrophidius uses this ability again, and the second time Troy doesn't let anybody off the hook. He makes everybody roll their will saves. But I just want to go through like what my thought process is and how I think it's intended to be handled. So if we look at a couple of things first. First of all, Dance of Death, yes, it says anybody who witnesses it, and witnessing is not a mechanical, technical term that's clearly defined in the rules. Now, this ability does have the visual trait, and if you look at the text for the visual trait, it does say that this is an ability that affects anybody who can view the creature that's using the ability. So if you can view it, then you should be subject to the will save in this case, or whatever the effect of the visual ability is. Now, again, this does create some confusion at game tables about what you can see, what you can't see, and the main reason why I say everybody in this situation should be required to make their will saves is because they all have clear line of sight to the enemy. And the reason why this is important is in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there are no facing rules. There are no rules in the system that require you to track which direction you are facing. It tracks what square you're occupying, but not what direction you are facing at any given time in that space. And so this is why some abilities like flanking doesn't say if you have an enemy in front of you and an enemy behind you, you are being flanked and you're flat-footed. It takes front and behind, side, all that out of the equation, and it just says if the enemies are on either sides or opposite corners, then it applies. So we do not track facing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And this is a little bit different than previous game systems that, especially really old fantasy RPGs like, first edition D&D and so forth, where there were rules and mechanics that talked about if you sneak up behind an enemy, if you backstab somebody, you have to be behind them. To do these things, you have to track what direction each character is facing. None of that exists in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There's no bonus applied to sneaking up behind somebody to your stealth check, and there's no penalty applied to somebody's perception score if someone's sneaking up behind them. The assumption in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is that all characters at all times are being constantly aware of their surroundings. They got their head on a swivel, they're making sure nobody's sneaking up behind them. If you say that you're aware of your surroundings at all times, you're trying to be aware of your surroundings at all times, that removes a lot of the necessity of being able to track or needing to track what direction any given creature is facing at any given time. Now, that said, there are some things that players can do to help mitigate the dangers of encountering a creature that might have a gaze attack like this. And the first of those is called Avert Gaze. Avert Gaze takes one action, and it says you avert your gaze from danger. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to saves against visual abilities that require you to look at a creature or object, such as a Medusa's petrifying gaze. Your gaze remains averted until the start of your next turn. So this is something that players can do when they are encountering a dangerous enemy like a Necrophidius that has an ability that would affect anybody within line of sight to them. Spend one action on Avert Gaze, and should the enemy use that visual ability, the Dance of Death or the Petrifying Gaze or whatever it may be, then you're going to get a +2 circumstance bonus to your save against it. Now, another thing you can do to avoid any kind of gaze attack that I certainly would not recommend in this particular encounter, but is an option in that's to blind yourself. I mean, like, you can put a blindfold on and give yourself the blinded condition. And once you have that blinded condition, then you cannot see and you cannot detect anything using vision, and therefore would not be subject to any kind of gaze attacks like the Necrophidius' Dance of Death. And one last thing I want to point out, just so that we are all following and understanding the rules of this encounter clearly, and that is, if we go back to our text about the Dance of Death ability, it says that each creature that witnesses the dance must make that save, not each enemy. So any creature that has line of sight to the Necrophidius when it does the Dance of Death is subject to this ability. Now, the reason why in this particular encounter, neither the Necrophidius nor the Bone Golem were affected by the Dance of Death is because they both have the Mindless trait. And as mindless creatures, they're constructs, they are not affected by any ability that has the mental trait. And Dance of Death has the mental trait. So that's why the Bone Golem and the Necrophidius were not affected. But if there were other creatures, other enemies in the room, if there were wolves or wargs, or there were goblins or orcs or what have you, they would all suffer the consequences of this ability the same as the players would. The only difference in this case is all the enemies were mindless constructs and therefore immune to mental abilities. So that's it for today when it comes to enemies that have gaze attacks. I believe the intent here is that anybody who has line of sight to them are going to face the consequences of those abilities. There are no facing rules in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so you don't get into, I wasn't looking that direction, I was looking this direction, I was paying attention to this and not that. Again, in 2nd Edition, all characters are assumed to be constantly looking over their shoulders, being aware of their surroundings, and keeping their head on a swivel, and therefore subject to any kind of gaze attack around them. If you want to mitigate the dangers, you can use the Avert Gaze ability, or even blindfold yourself, but I wouldn't do that in the middle of a fight. Obviously, that would be something that's better suited for maybe a haunt that only affects you if you see it and you want to walk through the range of the haunt and not be affected. So that's it for today. If you have any questions about this, please leave those in the comments. If you have any other thoughts about how to manage the situations in your game, please let me know in the comments as well. I'll make sure in the description of this video I leave links to the original Glass Cannon video that I clipped, as well as any other video topics that cover gaze attacks and these kind of saves. I'll include those in the description as well. And as always, I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody out there who supports me, whether that's by clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon. I greatly appreciate what you folks do to support me. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.